Have you ever been betrayed? Not just a broken promise or a white lie. I mean a soul-crushing, world-shattering betrayal by someone you trusted with your life. The kind of betrayal that makes you question your own sanity. When it happens, people often describe the feeling as a physical blow, a punch to the gut, a knife in the back. But here is the terrifying truth. Scientifically speaking, it's not just a metaphor. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a physical stab wound and a friend stabbing you in the back. Neuroscience shows us that social rejection and deep betrayal activate a region in the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. This is the exact same neural circuitry that processes raw, physical pain. Evolutionarily, human beings survived by forming tight-knit tribes. Trust was our ultimate survival mechanism. If your tribe turned against you, it meant exile, and exile meant death. Therefore, your brain evolved to treat betrayal as a lethal threat. It is a biological trauma. Throughout history, the most devastating crimes haven't been committed by strangers lurking in dark alleyways. They've been committed by brothers, best friends, and trusted allies. Today, we are opening the historical case files on the most brutal, calculating, and cold-blooded betrayals in human history. Cases where trust wasn't just broken, it was weaponized. Our first case takes us to the height of the paranoia-fueled Cold War. The year is 1950. The United States is in a state of absolute panic. The Soviet Union has just successfully tested their first atomic bomb, years ahead of schedule. The FBI knows someone leaked the blueprints of the Manhattan Project. They are hunting for a spy. Enter David Greenglass, an army machinist who had been stationed at Los Alamos, the top-secret facility where the atomic bomb was built. David was weak-willed, easily manipulated, and deeply terrified. When the FBI knocked on his door, they didn't just want him, they wanted a network. In the interrogation room, the FBI applied agonizing psychological pressure. They threatened David's wife, Ruth, who was actually the one typing up his stolen atomic notes. Facing the very real prospect of his wife going to prison and his children becoming orphans, the survival instinct kicked in. David's moral compass didn't just fracture, it completely disintegrated. To secure immunity for his wife and a lighter sentence for himself, David struck a literal deal with the devil. He threw his own flesh and blood to the wolves. He pointed the finger at his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg. But Julius wasn't enough for the prosecution. They wanted leverage. They wanted Julius's wife, David's own sister, Ethel. Ethel was a mother of 2 young boys. By all credible historical accounts and KGB archives uncovered decades later, Ethel was not an active spy. At most, she was aware of her husband's activities. But the prosecution needed a smoking gun to execute her. So David Greenglass took the witness stand. Under oath, looking directly across the courtroom at the sister he grew up with, David committed perjury. He explicitly testified that Ethel typed up the atomic secrets. It was a complete lie, fabricated to save his wife Ruth. Because of her brother's fabricated testimony, Ethel Rosenberg was convicted of espionage. On June 19, 1953, she was strapped into the electric chair. The first shock didn't kill her. It took 3 pulls of the switch to end her life. Her heart stopped beating, completely betrayed by the same blood that ran through her brother's veins. Decades later, when interviewed about sending his sister to a horrific death, David Greenglass simply shrugged. He said, "I would not sacrifice my wife and my children for my sister." You sleep with your wife. It is the ultimate evolutionary paradox. Blood is supposed to be thicker than water. But when the human amygdala, the brain's fear center, is activated by the threat of death, the concept of family can be deleted in a fraction of a second. If the first betrayal was born of fear, our next case is born of something far more insidious: obsession. We are stepping into the American Wild West. The year is 1882. Jesse James is not just an outlaw, he is an untouchable legend. He has robbed banks, derailed trains, and evaded the entire United States government for over a decade. Law enforcement couldn't catch him. Rival gangs couldn't kill him. Jesse was paranoid, highly intelligent, and trusted almost no one. He lived under an assumed name in Missouri, heavily armed at all times. But every fortress has a weak point. For Jesse James, that weak point wasn't a heavily armed sheriff. It was a 20-year-old superfan named Robert Ford. Robert Ford idolized Jesse. He read dime novels about him. He mimicked the way he walked and talked. Eventually, through family connections, Robert managed to insert himself into Jesse's inner circle. Jesse, perhaps blinded by his own ego or weary from years on the run, lowered his guard. He took the young man in, letting Robert and his brother Charlie live in his home, eat at his table, and play with his children. But what Jesse didn't know was that Robert Ford had already made a secret deal with the governor of Missouri. The bounty on Jesse's head was astronomical, but Ford didn't just want the money. Psychologists call it narcissistic objectification. Ford didn't just admire Jesse. He wanted to absorb his legend. He believed that the man who killed the legend would become an even bigger legend himself. The morning of April 3, 1882, it was unseasonably hot. Jesse James stood up in his living room, surrounded by his family and the Ford brothers. And then, he did something he had never done in the presence of strangers. He took off his guns. He turned his back. It was the ultimate display of trust. He was saying, "I know you are behind me, and I know I am safe." But the moment Jesse's back was turned, Robert Ford silently drew his own weapon. Ford shot his idol in the back of the head. The man who couldn't be caught by the U.S. cavalry was assassinated in his own living room, unarmed, by the fanboy who slept under his roof. But betrayal often carries its own psychological poison. Robert Ford expected to be hailed as a national hero. Instead, the public viewed him with absolute disgust. He wasn't a hero, he was a coward who shot an unarmed man in the back. Ford spent the rest of his miserable life touring in a cheap stage play, reenacting his one moment of treason every single night, until he himself was murdered in a saloon 10 years later. A fitting end for a traitor. But while Robert Ford betrayed his idol for fame, our final case involves a betrayal so catastrophic it nearly brought down an entire empire, and it was orchestrated by the one person the victim called "my son." Our final case brings us to the epicenter of the ancient world, Rome. March 15, 44 BC. The victim is Gaius Julius Caesar, the most powerful man on the planet. He has conquered Gaul, won a devastating civil war, and declared himself dictator for life. Caesar's greatest strength was also his fatal psychological flaw, his absolute belief in his own invulnerability. He didn't execute his political enemies, he pardoned them. He believed that by showing mercy, he could buy their loyalty. He was wrong. Among those he pardoned was Marcus Junius Brutus. Caesar didn't just forgive Brutus, he elevated him. He showered him with political power, wealth, and affection. In fact, historical records suggest Caesar treated Brutus like his own son. Some historians even speculate he may have been his biological father. But how does a man betray a father figure? How does the human brain process that level of treachery? Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance. To commit an unspeakable act against someone you love, you cannot see yourself as the villain. You have to rationalize the betrayal. You have to convince yourself it is for the greater good. Brutus convinced himself that Caesar was a tyrant, destroying the Roman Republic. He didn't want to kill a friend. He convinced his own brain he was saving a nation. And so, the conspiracy was born. 60 senators, 23 stab wounds. When the assassination began, Caesar fought back. He was a battle-hardened general, fighting off his attackers like a cornered lion. But then, through the chaos of flashing knives and blood, the crowd parted, and Caesar saw him. Marcus Brutus, the man he loved like a son. Remember what we discussed at the beginning? The anterior cingulate cortex, the exact moment your brain registers a betrayal as physical trauma. When Caesar saw Brutus holding a blade, the fight left him entirely. Ancient historians note that Caesar stopped defending himself. He pulled his toga over his head, covering his face, and simply surrendered to the blades. He didn't die from the 23 stab wounds. His spirit was annihilated the second he realized the boy he loved was holding one of the knives. Fear, obsession, rationalization. These are the psychological mechanisms that allow human beings to bypass thousands of years of evolutionary programming and destroy the people who trust them the most. Trust is the most dangerous gamble our species ever created. Without it, we wouldn't have built civilizations, families, or societies. We need it to survive. But every time you give someone your trust, you are handing them the absolute power to destroy you. You are giving them the knife and simply hoping they never use it. Most of the time, they don't. But when they do, the scars they leave on your brain will last a lifetime. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments down below, between David Greenglass, Robert Ford, and Brutus, which of these betrayals do you think is the most unforgivable? Let me know your thoughts. And if you want to keep exploring the darkest corners of human psychology and history, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next one.